So thank you, everybody. It's an honor to be here with you, a real privilege. My name is Michelle Rivero. I am the director of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs for the city of Minneapolis. And welcome to this panel on government accountability, on building a resilient immigration system through law and policy. I'm super grateful to be here with an incredible panel. Unfortunately, Dr. Saida Abdi with the U of M School of Social Work is not able to be with us today because she's sick. And I will do my level best to go through just a couple of her slides, but really invite you all to connect with her afterwards because she is just a tremendous wealth of knowledge and a wonderful person and an incredible resource that we're really lucky to have here in Minnesota. So I have, I'll just briefly introduce our speakers to you, and then we'll invite them to share more information about themselves when we get to their portions of the presentation. Kimberly Horner, to my right, is a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota, and to her right is Brianna Boberg, the Midwest Regional Manager at Welcoming America, which is a national nonprofit organization that supports organizational and government efforts to create and foster more welcoming communities that create a sense of belonging for all. We may have time for questions. We'll see how things go. But if we don't have time for questions by the end, invite you to reach out to any of us after the presentation. And sometimes my voice is a little soft. So if I need to be louder, if you could please just give me a thumbs up, that would be really helpful. I'm not the best at modulating. So I'll talk just a little bit, give a little bit of orientation and context, and then turn it over to Kim. About 5 years ago, the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs was initiated at a time that was very tumultuous. I see so many people around the room who have been warriors for justice, you know, and have experienced, along with immigrant and refugee residents, some of the challenges over the course of the last administration, particularly concerted federal efforts to prevent migration to the United States and also to deport individuals, our community members, residents, neighbors, and friends from this country. We've learned that sustained local government efforts, including in collaboration with community-based organizations, with multi-jurisdictional and multi-sectoral entities, not only lead to stronger communities, but also to a more robust, welcoming infrastructure, one that fosters a sense of belonging among immigrant and refugee residents. Now, an important question is, how can we take these important relationships that have been forged over the last 5 years and even longer to move beyond broader concepts of welcoming to really creating a sense of accountability in measurable ways so that we can measure our welcoming work and identify how successful it is in fostering that sense of belonging for community members. Since the beginning of this federal administration, we've seen some novel pathways for people to enter the United States, maybe dusting off some pathways for people to be able to come here in a quicker manner. And we've seen large-scale relocations of individuals to the United States and Minnesota. This has resulted in larger numbers of immigrants and refugees in our state and in the city of Minneapolis than we've seen in a number of years. The reality is that migration to the United States and to Minnesota, large-scale migration is likely to continue, and that creates an impetus for all of us to work together to develop methods of demonstrating the effectiveness of our collaborative welcoming work to hold ourselves accountable. I know that our speakers will help us navigate this landscape and will also give us some ideas on how to become more involved. And so with that, we'll turn first to Kim, who'll give us a bit of an overview of our offices around the country. More.
Clicker.
Oh, sorry.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Kim Horner, as Michelle said, and I'm a PhD candidate at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. And my work really focuses on the reception of immigrant and refugee communities in the United States. I'm particularly interested in what's happening at the local levels, so I'm excited to be a part of this panel. When I first came to Minneapolis to start my PhD, I had the opportunity to intern with Michelle at the Minneapolis Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And working with Michelle, I began to learn about this proliferation of local city offices around the US that were focused on receiving and welcoming immigrants and refugees throughout the country. In fact, I think my first project was compiling a list of these offices that existed at the time. I think there were maybe around 50 or so, and that's continued to grow over the last several years. So I'll start out by offering some broad context today, and then I'll let Michelle and Brianna fill in some more details. But local offices of immigrant and refugee affairs, or OIRAs as they're often called, are a fairly new feature of most local governments and local integration work in the US. So the New York City office was established in the 1980s, but the majority of these offices have actually emerged in the last 20 years. 20 years or so, and even more recently, like the Minneapolis office and the St. Paul office emerging in the last 5 years. Often they're located within the mayor's office, but they can be in different places. So the St. Paul office, for example, is in the city attorney general's office. And they're separate from, but often work in collaboration with state level offices, like the Minnesota Office of New Americans that was established in 2020 and just received permanent funding this current year. In many instances, these OIRAs were established as a response, as Michelle mentioned, to attacks on immigrant and refugee communities. And by attacks, I mean primarily policy changes targeting these communities and or anti-immigrant and anti-refugee rhetoric, often originating at the federal level, but sometimes at the state level or local levels as well. In response, many local governments describe a sense of responsibility to support and to some extent protect immigrant and refugee communities locally. Another motivation to establish OIRAs and welcoming efforts in some cities was a way to encourage new immigrant and refugee populations to come to those places, often in cities that are experiencing a decline in overall population and workforces. This kind of framing is used notably in some Rust Belt cities like Dayton, Ohio. In all of these cities, there's a focus on creating a sense of belonging regardless of race, country of origin, citizenship status, language, or other characteristics. And we'll hear more about this when we hear about what it means to be a welcoming city, Brianna. For now, I want to show this map that includes the location of each OIRA around the country that either I or my partners have reached out to over the last several years. So this isn't every office in the United States, and some of these offices focus more specifically on immigrant and refugee affairs than others, but this at least gives you some sense of the distribution of offices. They tend to be in large cities, but in really diverse contexts. They're in politically red states and blue states. They're in border states and interior states. They're in traditional immigrant gateways that have received large immigrant populations for decades, as well as new and re-emerging immigrant gateways that are not what we think of as typical immigrant receiving communities. They're in cities with immigrant populations that are small and immigrant populations that are large, but also in cities where these populations are growing really quickly, and in cities, like I mentioned, where populations are declining. So over the past several years, I've worked on research related to a few different questions that pertain to OIRAs and welcoming work in these cities. I've asked how OIRAs emerge and establish in different contexts and learned it's often in response to tension, like I said, at the local, state, or federal level. I've asked what challenges OIRAs face in establishing their priorities, and I've heard from these leaders about challenges in representation, in facing anti-sanctuary policies, and in changes in city leadership. I've asked about COVID-19 and how that impacted their strategies and priorities, and heard many offices describe this as what they call a bittersweet opportunity to demonstrate the importance of immigrant and refugee inclusion at the local level. And I've also asked how OIRAs collect and use data to shape narratives related to immigrant and refugee communities in their cities. And I learned about challenges in the capacity and security to collect data, but also the utility of data for demonstrating to leadership the real needs of those communities. In all of these examples, city OIRAs are working to hold cities accountable to all of their residents to create a safe space of belonging for each person. So today I'm going to focus on two broad ideas that have emerged from my conversation with offices around the city or around the country as ways that they can create positive institutional change. So I'll introduce these with some words that came from people that I've talked to. The two ideas I want to talk about are the ideas of wide lanes and collaboration. So introducing the idea of wide lanes, an interviewee at a newer OIRA that I talked to told me, you got to stay in your lane, but you want to create a big lane for yourself. She said, I started seeing my job as less about immigration policy and more about any policy that may have a distinct or different impact on immigrants and refugees than people who are not immigrants and refugees. So when we talk about the quote lane of the OIRA, it might seem somewhat limited. After all, the federal government controls immigration policy that determines who's let into the country, how many people are let into the country, the different types of immigration status, how we regulate those statuses, and immigration enforcement. But at the local level, cities have a lot of potential to affect the day-to-day lives of these communities. Local offices can do some things to affect federal and state policies that have negatively affected their communities. A lot of offices described how important it is to write public comments that highlight the potential disparate effects that policy changes might have on certain groups. And cities also have the responsibility to serve their residents, and that means all their residents. Local OIRAs have helped cities take steps to better serve residents with different backgrounds, and there are tons of examples. They've helped end certain forms of cooperation between local law enforcement and immigration enforcement. They help support citizenship acquisition so that more immigrants and refugees can fully participate. There are more examples, but the point is that local offices are thinking creatively about how to work across departments and local organizations to address a wide range of challenges. The second quote is from a staff member at a different OIRA, but it describes collaboration as an important approach to creating these wide lanes. The staff member told me, we developed a core body of work and figured out where we need to collaborate. Because when you talk about immigrant integration, it's much larger than OIRA's mission alone. It includes jobs and transportation. It includes access to housing and being able to feel safe in a neighborhood. The most effective OIRAs that I've talked to aren't working alone. They aren't isolated offices that are independently addressing immigrant and refugee concerns or celebrating immigrants and refugee contributions. That doesn't work well. And while OIRAs help to bridge the divide between cities and marginalized communities, the work of welcoming is broader and needs to be a collaborative effort. OIRAs serve an important role by establishing relationships with immigrant and refugee communities and elevating their voices to the level of city government. But real changes come with collaboration, and it's a two-way street. It's helping communities learn how to access the city and helping the city learn how to be more supportive of each community. To work toward welcoming, each city department and project, with the help of these OIRAs, needs to intentionally consider how the proposal and implementation of new policy will be communicated with communities and how it will be experienced by them. And that's not an easy task. It's easy for me to keep saying this phrase of immigrant and refugee communities, but we have to remember that we're not talking about a homogenous group of people either. We're talking about people from different backgrounds, who speak different languages, who've been in the US for different lengths of time, have different relationships with the city government or expected relationships. So it's a really big job with wide lanes, and it's gonna take a lot of collaboration. A quick example of what I mean, in one city, an OIRA staff member talked about frustration with a small business assistance program that was quickly rolled out during COVID-19. And they were offering grants to small businesses to support their work. But it was rolled out so quickly that it was another 2-week lag before anything was translated into another language. And because this was on a first come, first served basis, the majority of funds had already been allocated before any small businesses that didn't have English as a first language were able to really access that information and apply for that. So they were mad, understandably, but it did create the possibility for advocacy. And so people pushed back. They went straight to the deputy mayor and talked about the effect that this was having on the community. And it really changed the way that city approached the rest of their COVID-19 relief. And so everything was then routed through the OIRA with a really big focus on language access. And so that's an example of, unfortunately, a really terrible first outcome that through community advocacy, they were able to think about how these departments could collaborate and better support immigrant and refugee communities. So in closing, I want to step back and think about the role that we can all play in this work, regardless of our backgrounds or our jobs or our former experience with this issue. Over and over again, when talking with OIRA staff, I heard statements like the one you see here. One person I talked to said, if resources come and go, mayors come and go, and if you don't have people in community who continue the advocacy and continue that work, have that political connection, then it becomes more symbolic efforts. In cities around the country, I heard about the importance of community advocacy. and establishing welcoming efforts and highlighting challenges of immigrant and refugee communities and celebrating diverse communities and pushing for collaboration between the city, the business community, and the nonprofit sector. Welcoming work doesn't work without all of us. It's not a check mark that we make, okay, the city is welcoming now, we're done. It's an ongoing dynamic two-way process that requires community involvement and investment. These OIRAs are places that can channel energies and elevate voices, but those energies and voices need to come from the community first. We, all of us, need to be thinking critically about the changing dynamics of welcoming in our communities, and we need to be thinking creatively about how to effectively collaborate. This work starts by showing up for one another, voting, being involved in city budget conversations, writing public comments, contacting elected officials. Welcoming and government accountability starts with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And I know many of you, and some of you know that I was an immigration attorney before I started working for the city of Minneapolis. I'm going to spend some time sharing a little bit of information about OIRA Minneapolis, but just want to say that Kim was actually a lifesaver in my first few months as the city. As some of you may know, OIRA is and has been so far a one-person office, and as Kim has stated, it's really impossible to do this work alone. We rely on collaborative partners, and really appreciate the reach out from the U of M pretty early in my tenure, and Kim's participation in doing research at the outset, at the initiation of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, which made a huge difference. So I'll just start with a quickie statistic, with regard to our immigrant and refugee population in Minneapolis. And there is some information that's slightly outdated that can be found in the Journey to Belonging in the Twin Cities report. I know there are some copies outside, and I'll be talking about that a little bit today too. So our population, our immigrant and refugee population in the city of Minneapolis is estimated at somewhere between 60 and 63,000 individuals. So about 1/6 of the population of the city. And we know that that population is increasing significantly. Back in 2017, the city of Minneapolis really developed a welcoming platform with a number of different measures focused on immigrant and refugee inclusion responsive to the time. One of those measures was the creation of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. Another was the advancement of the U certification ordinance, which sets a timeline for U certifying officers in the city attorney's office and in the police department to make a decision on certification requests for victims of crime. And then in addition to that, an allocation of funding for immigration legal services, so that city of Minneapolis residents who weren't able to afford an immigration attorney were able to consult with and obtain representation by an immigration attorney. These developments, these programs, policies, initiatives were advanced with an eye towards public safety, that it was integral and important for community members to have an open door to the city of Minneapolis from the standpoint of the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, to be able to connect with resources in the city, and then also to be able to access legal services in order to prevent deportation, to ensure family unity to the extent possible in our city and state. So following that initial spurt of activity, the question was, what next? And really, we spent the next few years addressing immediate needs of community members, connecting people to service providers, identifying what needs were. And, fast forwarding to COVID, that really elevated, from a city standpoint, the need to address other factors, other aspects of a person's reality, ensuring that people have a place in our society. If they're not born in the United States, isn't limited to ensuring that people have access to counsel. It also includes making sure people have access to healthcare, to jobs, to education, to a variety of different essential needs in our society. And so OIRA started collaborating more intentionally with multi-jurisdictional partners, with multi-sectoral partners. And we were very fortunate to be able to collaborate also with the City of St. Paul. I know you heard earlier from Edmundo Lijo, my counterpart in St. Paul. Edmundo and I talk multiple times a day. It's actually scary how much we talk. And our collaboration has been beneficial because each of us are one-person offices. So in terms of what we can accomplish together, there's great synergy, also beneficial for communities because in many respects, people don't really see a jurisdictional distinction between Minneapolis and St. Paul. And so fortunately, the two of us are not in a rivalry situation, or more in a collaborative situation. And one of the collaborations that is paying fruit still today is the creation of the Journey to Belonging, the Twin Cities report on immigrant and refugee inclusion. And this collaborative effort included the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, the St. Paul Chamber, and an advisory committee that was composed of a number of folks in a variety of different, sectors, organizations, so community-based organizations, government at the city, county, and state level. We had Minneapolis Public Schools involved. There were some business interests involved, faith-based interests involved as well. And the result was a report that really identifies what we can do together in order to support community members in achieving a sense of belonging in our city. And there are 4, I'm not even going through, sorry, everyone. No, let's just, okay. So this is a little bit of an overview about the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. I just kind of went into what I wanted to say without going to, I don't have too many slides. So this just gives you a little bit of an overview about the objective, the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. So generally, we support residents in achieving lives of safety, dignity, and opportunity in the city of Minneapolis. And this is a joint effort, right? It takes all of us. So I invite you all to participate. There are plenty of spaces. I'll talk more about them in a moment. Other responsibilities of OIRA include to participate in advancing immigrant and refugee inclusion policies. And we're talking a little bit about the report, and I'll talk more about that. To inform communities relating to immigration-related opportunities and topics, including through community-based organizations that have established trust with community, and also to connect residents to resources, including immigration legal service providers and more. So let's see what else. Okay, Journey to Belonging. The Journey to Belonging is divided into 4 thematic areas, including, first of all, it starts with a great data overview with a lot of demographic information. Again, it's a little bit old now. I think it's from 2019. It's still very useful to chart languages spoken, length of residence in the United States, immigration status, and this is for St. Paul and Minneapolis. So helpful for a comparison snapshot too. And then with regard to the recommendations, they are in 4 thematic areas: in connected communities, safe communities, workforce, and equitable access to education, housing, and healthcare, and economic and workforce development. And one of the reasons that this collaborative effort, which lasted between 2020 and 2021, with the report coming out in April of 2022, is that it really has provided us in the city of Minneapolis and city of St. Paul with a roadmap on where we should go that's informed by community. So a recommendation to connect more and collaborate more closely with Minneapolis Public Schools. We've initiated that relationship, and that has proved very fruitful from the standpoint of connecting with newcomers and understanding how many newcomers we have and what languages are spoken and how to best connect with them, et cetera. And so I invite folks to take a moment to look at that. One additional benefit of this report is it really offers a tool for people to see where they plug in or what resonates most with them. So we're really grateful for the leadership and participation and the faith of Welcoming America and the American Immigration Council, which supported this work and gave us insights and guidance throughout the process. This was part of a Gateways for Growth initiative to encourage communities around the country to develop immigrant and refugee inclusion plans. And this is really step one. I think our next step really is implementation. So these are some goals and strategies. And so where do we go from here? I want to make sure to share just a little bit more information with regard to recent arrivals in Minnesota. And I want to contextualize this a little bit too. So what I'm sharing on this screen is information that we've received in Minnesota from the Department of Homeland Security, indicating numbers of folks at the southern border who've expressed an intended destination of the Minnesota-Wisconsin area. This doesn't necessarily reflect how many people actually are here, but reflects how many people have expressed the intention to come here. And so Minneapolis has been receiving this data since July. And my information isn't quite so updated. This slide is just a little outdated from October. The November numbers indicate that the total is about 6,000, just shy of a little more than 6,000 folks, with over 3,000 of them from Ecuador, and then other countries as well, right? So this is not these are by no means the only people who are coming to Minnesota. We have folks who are here from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from a variety of different countries that are not reflected in this data. But it does point up to the value, the urgency, the critical nature of our collaborative efforts together. And I want to just share a couple of collaborative spaces and invite you all to participate. Capacity permitting, as everyone always talks about capacity. What's your capacity? So there is a monthly Twin Cities Immigration Forum that the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul host together. Those are recorded and are available on the OIRA webpage, where we share updates on immigration-related developments and work that's happening in community, including work that you are doing. So if you may be interested in presenting at a future Twin Cities Immigration Forum, you'd be welcome to come and reach out to me or Edmundo. Another space is the Welcoming Twin Cities meeting. So that's different from the Twin Cities Immigration Forum. This meeting series initiated about a year ago, as there were concerns around whether Minnesota would become a destination location for people bused by the efforts of elected officials in other states. And so we started meeting with a group of folks, including community-based organizations, Minneapolis Public Schools, governmental representatives, and those meetings have continued regularly and have grown. And while we are not seeing folks bust from the southern border, from Texas, for example, this has given us the perspective to understand that we are seeing an increase that's becoming significant in newcomers arriving from a variety of different countries. So Ecuador, Venezuela, Honduras, Mexico, Guatemala, Colombia, also Senegal, also Somalia, and also many other countries. And so this collaborative space, which we're very grateful that state of Minnesota representatives are now participating in more regularly and staffing more consistently, is a great place to forge some of these connections in developing and building a more robust, welcoming infrastructure in the state of Minnesota. And I'm going to turn it over to Brianna. I will just, before I do so, I'm not going to do justice to Dr. Saeed Abdi's slides, but I will just share, she's involved in this incredible project that's with Minneapolis Public Schools and students, including newcomer students. It's called the Circle Project. I invite you to inquire more with her. And a couple of points that I know that she wanted to make include the fact that that people who are not refugees, but who have migrated to the United States experience levels of trauma that are equivalent to, if not greater than those experienced by refugees. So just because a person comes to the United States not as a refugee, but as another immigration classification, don't think that that person does not have potentially a traumatic background. So she also, I love this slide. And again, she also wanted to highlight that there are a variety of stages of vulnerability, and that one of the most significant stages of vulnerability is actually post-migration. So after people get to the United States. I am not going to be able to explain this one. Okay. And I think I'll pause there. With that, I will turn it over to Brianna. Thank you very much. Oops.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So hello, my name is Brianna Broberg. I work at Welcoming America, which is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work with our network of members, which are made up of local governments, so city and county level, and also local nonprofit organizations across the US. And we work with those communities to help them develop and strengthen policies and programming around immigrant inclusion. I'll talk a little bit about my role and then share a bit more specifics about some of the work that Welcoming America does, and hopefully offer some tangible takeaways for you to consider in your communities and in your own work, much of which I imagine a lot of you are already doing. So I am the Midwest Regional Manager. That means that I get to work with all of our members, about 90 of them, local government and local nonprofits across a 10-state region in the Midwest, including here in Minnesota. So I get to work with Michelle, I get to work with Edmundo, and a lot of other really great folks in larger cities like the Twin Cities, and also smaller, more rural communities, and kind of everything in between. And my work really involves technical assistance, which can take on a lot of different forms. Sometimes that looks like helping to forge connections between organizations or communities who are thinking about or working through similar concerns or obstacles and want the opportunity to do a knowledge exchange with others who are thinking about things similarly. Sometimes it involves doing field scans. What are some good practices that are happening, and how can those perhaps be adapted into a different local context? And then part of my work also is with our Welcoming International initiative, which I'll just touch on very briefly. Welcoming America convenes an alliance of international partners from 7 different countries, all of which operate on a national level, but also with networks across their respective countries of local immigrant inclusion practitioners, both, again, governmental and non-governmental entities, and exchange best practices, because oftentimes, although the context might be somewhat different, given the different way that governments function, the different services that are available in different countries, there are still really great lessons that can be learned. So we always appreciate those opportunities as well. So Welcoming America, as I said, it's a national organization, but really we are always thinking locally. We have regional managers that work with folks across not quite all 50 states. I think there's maybe 3 where we don't have Welcoming America members currently, but we have about a little less than 350 local government and local nonprofit members. And those are entities, but the folks that we get to work with are in the thousands, because there are a number of people in each of those organizations, and they do such wonderful work across communities. So we get to involve a lot of different folks from a lot of different places in thinking about policies and programming around immigrant inclusion. So Welcoming America leads a movement of inclusive communities becoming more prosperous by ensuring that everyone belongs. And we believe that all people, including immigrants, are valued contributors and vital to the success of our communities and our shared future. So what that means is that Welcoming America's big idea is about the power of local communities to change the narrative on immigration and make everyone who lives in a community feel like they belong, and beyond feeling, really have the support in place to thrive and prosper as active and included community members, partners, and leaders. So as I said, we work with our members to help develop and strengthen their policies and programming around immigrant inclusion. And how we do that is through a variety of methods, including recurring programming, webinar series, grant funding, individual and cohort-based technical assistance. We have an annual conference that brings together over 800 immigrant inclusion practitioners from across the US and around the world called the Welcoming Interactive. And some of our programming is more broad-based around the idea of belonging. Other programs are more specifically tailored to address particular needs. And all of our programming and kind of the driving force behind Welcoming America's mission is built around something that we call the Welcoming Standard. So the Welcoming Standard provides a comprehensive on-ramp and roadmap for places that are building more cohesive and equitable communities and fostering connections between newer immigrants and longer-term residents. It also sets benchmarks for communities that their organizations, residents, and others can use to hold local governments and welcoming places accountable and to inspire continued innovation. So essentially, the standard provides a common language and an understanding of what it means to be a welcoming community. And it also provides a structure or a framework for local communities that are interested in developing or strengthening their welcoming work. The Welcoming Standard's 7 framework areas you can see on the screen here are our way of making the implicit explicit and providing communities an extremely comprehensive work plan to build inclusion for immigrants and break down barriers for all. Some of those framework areas you'll see should look familiar based on what Michelle just shared about the journey to belonging in the Twin Cities report. And because we have a limited time today, I'm not going to go into great detail about the specifics of each of the framework areas, but I'll just note on a practical level that there are a particular set of indicators for each framework area. There's a total of about 105, and those indicators help provide communities with goals to work toward to achieve a more welcoming community in practical, tangible ways. And so if you're interested in learning more about the standard or about those specific indicators, you can do so on Welcoming America's website, which is just welcomingamerica.org. Thinking about accountability and how the standard ties into that. The Welcoming Standard was designed as a way for communities to not only take practical steps to become more welcoming, but also as a way for community members to ultimately hold their local government accountable for achieving, maintaining, and continuing to develop and strengthen welcoming and belonging. And so at Welcoming America, we believe that strong communities are ones that connect and include people of all backgrounds. And by doing so, communities and those who live there will meet their highest civic, social, and economic potential. So as local governments look to create more equitable and vibrant communities, welcoming and inclusive policies and programming practices, those things will help them to do that and will help them set themselves apart. Leaders in local governments across the US can lean on the Welcoming Standard framework areas to measure, promote, guide, and validate welcoming efforts. And when they do so, that can be formally recognized in the form of something called the Certified Welcoming Designation. So Certified Welcoming is a formal designation for local governments that have created policies and programs that reflect their values and commitment to immigrant inclusion. And the Certified Welcoming Program assesses local governments on their efforts to include and welcome immigrants in all areas of civic, social, and economic life in their communities. Certified Welcoming is a community designation, and it requires a whole of community approach, like Kim and Michelle both mentioned. So in order to achieve that designation, it really does involve everyone in a very intentional multi-sector way. Local governments are the lead applicant for the designation. They submit an application and complete a self-assessment against the standard, against those indicators that I talked about. And after they do that, the Certified Welcoming team does a desktop review and then goes to visit the community to do an evaluative site visit. And after that, the community receives a very detailed final report that will identify local strengths in that community and also provides a roadmap for areas of growth. Once a community is certified welcoming, that certification is valid for 4 years, after which if the community wants to maintain that designation, they need to reapply and go through the certification process again in order to become recertified. Recertification isn't a guarantee. And that's because communities change, they grow, the needs of the community change over time. And so what's needed for a community to be truly welcoming isn't stagnant, and we don't want people to become complacent. As Kim said, it's not meant to be a checkbox. It's really meant to be something that is continually thought about and worked on and worked toward. So how getting certified can help to achieve accountability. As I said, the standard was developed to provide a common agenda and benchmarks for what it means to be welcoming, and certified welcoming, the designation itself, is intended to motivate communities to go beyond just a baseline by recognizing and rewarding them with the designation of certified welcoming. It would be really wonderful if every place and all people were just intrinsically motivated to help everyone, but that's not always the case. And so sometimes the way to inspire people to become more welcoming is to give them an incentive. And local governments are oftentimes really incentivized when they see other governments that received a designation. Well, I want that too. I want my community to be recognized for the wonderful work that's happening here. I want to attract and retain people in my community. What's a way that I can do that? And certified welcoming is sometimes one of those ways. And the designation, as I said, it's intended to create accountability for the work. And it was designed with the local government in mind as the recipient of the designation, but it's for the local community members, for partners, for those multi-sector actors who are involved in this welcoming work to be able to use it to hold their local government accountable. If you say that you're welcoming, what does that mean? What does it look like? What happens if you're not meeting what you've said that you're going to meet? And so there's a number of benefits to certification. The certified welcoming team are a neutral third party, and so they can help identify gaps in current immigrant inclusion efforts and assist a community in prioritizing what are some good next steps to take in strengthening and developing those welcoming policies and practices. It can bring new partners into the work. If you have a specific task that you're working towards, sometimes it can help you to engage harder to activate partnerships, and it can help commit community partners to participating in that action. As I mentioned, sometimes local governments are excited to have the profile of that city or county be raised on a national level. And also that designation can be used as a marketing tool for attracting and retaining a global workforce and businesses. And although that isn't how I personally like to think about the most important aspect of immigrant inclusion, it can sometimes be a strong incentive for local government to seek out the designation and to take on all of the other aspects of becoming a welcoming community. It also helps to ensure a continued commitment and accountability to welcoming and immigrant inclusion. And that's helpful, particularly during and after changes in locally elected leadership. And it helps to benchmark policies and programs. Where have you been? Where are you now? And where do you want to go? And helps identify those strengths and create a roadmap to get towards those goals. And it helps you assess your progress over time. And so I'll just close with one last moment here, sort of bringing it back to the more local context here in Minnesota. There are over 20 Minnesota-based Welcoming America members, including local governments, like I said, the city of Minneapolis and the city of St. Paul, and a number of smaller communities as well, and nonprofit organizations like Arts Midwest, regional development commissions, community foundations. In addition to the Gateways for Growth program that Michelle talked about, we also have other opportunities to help local communities, particularly rural communities, through our rural welcoming initiative, which also helps communities to develop and implement welcoming plans in a context particularized to more rural areas. And you don't have to be a big city in order to be able to make a significant impact with your policies and programming around immigrant inclusion. The cities of Austin and Winona, Minnesota were the two first government entities from Minnesota to become Welcoming America members. And they've had a really significant impact in their local area, in the region, throughout the Welcoming America network, and honestly, globally. We had a group of researchers from Portugal reach out to the Welcoming International Initiative earlier this year to say that they wanted to talk to some folks who are doing immigrant inclusion in a very intentional way. and wanted some best practices and good examples from communities in the US. And we highlighted the city of Austin and actually brought some folks over from Portugal to go visit that community and participated in a learning exchange. And it helped both the visitors from Portugal and the community in Austin to think about what are some of their best practices and also what can they learn from each other and continue to innovate their welcoming and inclusive policies and programming. We recently brought some folks from the cities of Winona and St. Charles, Minnesota, on a program to Australia called the Rural Welcoming Communities Exchange, where local immigrant inclusion practitioners from rural communities in the US and Australia came together to learn from each other, to share good ideas, to work through problems together. So you can be, a really small community, but have a really big impact on a global scale. And then just one more note about certification. There aren't currently any certified welcoming places in the state of Minnesota. We do have 21 certified welcoming cities and counties nationally, and a number of others that are currently in the pipeline, including the city of Bloomington, Minnesota, which is going through the process right now. So we'll be excited to hopefully see them become the first certified welcoming place in Minnesota. And we recently introduced a new certified welcoming designation. Rather than being just certified or not, there's a star system, 1 star through 5 stars, that help to be a little bit more flexible and accessible, because of course there are different resources available in different types of communities, different community archetypes, and we want that designation to be accessible to folks. Just because you don't have the same amount of money or human resources doesn't mean that your community isn't welcoming and shouldn't be held up as a good example. So I think I'll stop there and turn things back over to Michelle.
Super. Thank you so much, Brianna. And thank you, Kim, also. We have a couple of minutes left in case people have questions. I hope that we've provided some good information for you, some insights into where you may be able to plug in and learn more. I invite folks to grab our emails and feel free to reach out to us to learn more. It was really just kind of scratching the surface of what we could share with you within an hour, but really look forward to collaborating further. And I also want to share, just in terms of accountability and holding government accountable, that the city of Minneapolis is going through its final budget conversations right now. There is a proposal to add additional funding for the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, a proposal that was advanced by Councilmember Wansley, Councilmember Chugtai, and Councilmember Osman. And so if you have interest in being more involved, I'll be honest, before I started working for the city of Minneapolis, I was not too engaged on municipal actions, but really realized how much of an impact municipal actions, resourcing, and funding has on local communities. So really invite you all to learn more. And if I can share any links for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. We've got 2 minutes. So if somebody has like a brief question, feel free to ask it. Or if there are any last things that you wanted to share, want to turn the mic over to my colleagues here.
I would just echo what you said about the budget. And if anyone wants to really look closely at budgets in other cities that are doing this work, Michelle's doing a lot on a small budget. And so I would check out the proposal and speak up. So I'll just add that piece, that I think we do have more work we can do, even though we're doing a great job here.
Yeah, and I would just add, in addition to the Journey to Belonging in the Twin Cities report, a number of other communities have participated in the Gateways for Growth program in the past. So if you're interested in seeing other welcoming plans and what those might look like in different communities, you can check those out on gatewaysforgrowth.org. Just if you're thinking about in your own community, what might be some ways that you're currently participating in immigrant inclusion, but might want to grow that, or new ideas that you might want to think about in your own community. And those are always nice to look to if you're having to go to local government to advocate for something new, to say, look, this has been tested and it's had success someplace else, and we'd love to see it happen here.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our panelists and have a great lunch.
Thank you.